What's going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with my main man, Toby D. And today we're joined by none other than famed, I'm going to call him famed QB Coach Sean McEvoy. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Famed is probably a stretch, but I'm going to take all the compliments I can get.
I'm about to say,
So
you're famed to
happy to
us.
be here. Yeah, no, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me back. It's cool to be here again with you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. Like, we sat down last year. You were nice enough to come on when I had questions about red zone production and what makes red zone production go, and the general basis of our conversation was like play calling is a major aspect, and lo and behold, the first part of the 2021 season, play calling was real well, and our red zone production was uh, moving at a clip that I hadn't seen in quite a while. So now, granted, it's still started to slack off as teams figured us out and we lost players in the process. But
Sure.
still, the what you were saying, it was holding true. So the reason why we just called you back, or decided, not
Yeah.
decided, but wanted to have you back on, was we ran into you down there at the Senior Bowl. Me and Toby were down there, checking out prospects and things like that, and we bumped into you, and you were obviously down there watching Malik Willis. Now, is he the only quarterback you're training with down there? Was it just Malik?
So he was the only one that was down there in
Okay.
Mobile. Our draft prep crew right now includes Malik and then also De'Ara King from Miami, Anthony Brown from Oregon. So those three guys are who we're focused on the pre-draft process with now.
Okay. So now, do you only work with college guys, or do you work with like high school guys, pro guys? Like what's your repertoire of guys that that y'all run through your programs?
Yeah, definitely the whole crew. So Quincy Avery and I and quarterback takeover and the four coaches that work for us, Coach Bees, Coach Shorty, Coach Dre, Coach Chip, Coach Green, a bunch of crew. It's really everybody from youth through high school, college, NFL, the draft prep, kind of everywhere in between. So, certainly the last few years as, the original clients that we've been working with over the last 5, 6 years are now taking that next step through college or getting ready for the NFL. That's taking a lot of Quincy and I's attention to the NFL, college, and draft prep guys. But yeah, certainly I still coach sit and train sixth, seventh graders, train a bunch of kids in high school throughout Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee and kind of all over. So
Well, I have to ask you like an offbeat type question. What is your
yeah,
favorite group to train? Like, is it the young guys because they're a sponge, or is it the like draft prep guys because of the magnitude of the situation? Like which one like makes you smile when it's up on your schedule? You know what I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's definitely cool pieces about all the different age groups. Obviously, I'm passionate about just training quarterbacks and helping them develop in whatever capacity I can. But certainly, there's like a cool factor when you're working with the NFL
Mm.
guys or the draft prep guys, and the high profile stuff is really neat. It's very rewarding that guys at that level put their trust in what you do and feel that you're a piece of what can help get them, to the next level. So that's certainly cool. But yeah, but you get that seventh grade QB who's like trying to figure things out for the first time, or that sophomore QB who thinks he's got a shot to be the varsity starter now for the first time ever, and you know, it, regardless of where they're at, they all want to take that
Right.
next step to their next piece, and so it's very similar in that standpoint. For me, it's the guys that are willing to put the
Mm.
time in to get better that you want to pour everything you have into them. So as long as the athlete has that piece, it's really just as fun for me.
Has that internal drive to succeed and to get better. Yeah, I would imagine
Exactly
that
right.
that's a major aspect. But turning our attention to the draft prep guys, obviously we're
Yeah.
full into draft season now. Um,
Yeah.
you have two glaringly different types of quarterbacks who just played in the Super Bowl. You had your
Yeah.
your 13-year vet, and then your young up-and-comer as far as quarterbacks go. Similar style, I think, in the sense of like, that gunslinger mentality. But, it just goes to show you that, it takes all types, as far as quarterback play and stuff like that goes. There's not just one mold. I think nowadays we get caught up in, I say we, I think it's a lot of like the draft Twitter that gets caught up in what I label as the modern quarterback, the one that can, throw on the run or make plays off schedule and stuff, which is all great things that you want,
Sure.
But it's not the only way to succeed. So when you look at the guys that are in this draft, I don't know how much you have, studied the other guys who you're not working with. I don't know if, like, in a sense, you view them as like competition. You know what I'm saying? Do you study guys that you're not working with as like, as a player would break down game film or something? But like, what stands out to you with this class? Because this class isn't getting the hype that last year's class did. There's a lot of feelings that this is not a premier quarterback class this year. So, like, what are your takes on this class?
Yeah, I mean, that's the narrative that started so early. I mean, really, you were still in December, January. College football season wasn't over yet. And they were still beginning this narrative. And I get it. I mean, there's no Trevor Lawrence in this class, right? There's no quarterback that when he was a freshman in college, guys were saying, oh, he's going to be the number one pick in 2021, 3 years from now, right? So Trevor Lawrence and to some extent Justin Fields, they were tagged as being like can't miss QBs 3 years before they came out in the draft. And so if you're a casual observer, well, you're like, oh, well, this was the guy that was no doubt about it. This is the next Andrew Luck or the next whoever, that's not in this class. So I get where the narrative started from. But I think people are doing a disservice to the quarterbacks who are in this class. And I think that narrative will change as people dig deeper into the process. I think you guys saw a little bit of that already at the Senior Bowl, where maybe guys didn't know who Malik Willis was, and then they see him live for maybe the first time, and there's this buzz that grows, right? And so, we still have the combine to go. We still have all the pro days, all the individual. I would guess that as you get closer to the actual draft, you'll hear less and less of there's no elite quarterbacks in this class. This is nothing compared to the one I hear now is the number one quarterback from this class would be the sixth best QB in last year's draft, right? That's the one everyone loves to say. Mac Jones would have been Mac Jones, or even I've heard like, Kellen Mond or Davis Mills or Kyle Trask would be the number one QB this year. I think that's going too far. You asked me about how much I evaluate the other quarterbacks. I'm certainly aware of them all. I've watched a lot of their film, saw them play throughout the year. I'm a fan of a lot of them, to be honest with you, but certainly you're biased to the guys and work with closely. Right. So let's just put Malik in that realm. And the guys that I've worked with closely in the last couple of years have been Justin Fields and Trey Lance. So guys that I can kind of compare really without the bias, because I work with all of them and we work through their college and into the draft process. I think Malik really stands up well in the comparison to both Trey and Justin. And I think, quite honestly, you'll hear more of this closer to the draft. I think there'll be evaluators, and certainly the team that goes and drafts Malik, I think they'll tell you that we had him rated higher than maybe we had Justin or Trey.
Okay.
Right? Not that every team
right.
that way, but I think there will be as teams really break down and evaluate. And I think that'll change. Now, what do they think of Matt Corral? Is Matt Corral similar to Zach Wilson? Is Kenny Pickett better or worse than Mac Jones? Right? That'll be all interesting to see how that plays out. But just to throw out this class of quarterbacks like they're nowhere near the quarterbacks from last year, I think is a little bit of an early, wild take at this point.
So I do want to say, man, I appreciate you guys allowing me to be in on this. And I did watch that whole show last year, and I was very intrigued by a lot of the things that you said about the red zone. I did want to ask you, what was the process like getting Malik Willis ready for this situation going into the Senior Bowl? Did you guys go over what you possibly thought that the teams were going to be looking for and what he needed to polish up getting ready for the Senior Bowl? How did that process go?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think you're looking at each step of the process and your focus changes slightly, right? Now, Malik, we've had an advantage because I started training Malik when he was in high school. And so Malik's been training with me. And then over the last few years with both Quincy and me for like 6 years now, right? So a lot of the things that you normally have to do when you get a quarterback to start his pre-draft process, we didn't have to do with Malik because he was comfortable with us. We had already kind of got that relationship down. There were a lot of mechanical things that we had kind of already set the foundation for. So we were able to kind of jump in a little bit quicker with Malik into what was going to prepare him for the NFL. And since since the Senior Bowl was the first thing he had, that was certainly where our focus was. And it was really on drops and footwork, right? Like, he had done very little under center stuff in college, and we knew that was going to be a big piece of what Detroit was going to ask him to do at the Senior Bowl. And so just getting him comfortable with the under center footwork and even just like how to take snaps from under center, right? It was so funny. I mean, especially on that rainy day on Wednesday, there were a lot of other quarterbacks fumbling snaps and couldn't get out from under center. And, just making sure that they're able to do the little things well. And then especially with some of the like play action from under center, some of that footwork is unique. And you just want to have a quarterback be really, really comfortable in that situation. So that was where a lot of our focus was, quite honestly. And the way it works is like about a week before they report to Mobile, they'll get on like Zoom calls with the Detroit Lions coaching staff. And at this point, Coach Mark Brunell, obviously everybody knows Mark from when he played with Jacksonville, but he was on Zoom calls with all the quarterbacks. He gave them the playbook, so they were able to kind of start to mentally prepare what some of the the plays and the install they would be running that next week. So we certainly tried to dive into that as best we can. And you can't prepare them for what it's going to be like when an NFL coaching staff coaches them. But if you can make them a little bit comfortable, that's kind of the key. And, we just wanted to make sure we knew it was a good opportunity for Malik to showcase like side by side with all the other quarterbacks there. And we just wanted to make sure he was ready to, kind of show off his best self, which, we were pretty happy with the way the week went on.
Oh yeah. I think, coming out of the Senior Bowl, like his name was on a lot of different people's, lips as far as like, guys like ourselves in the press box to, we heard, rumors that, the Steelers took a like real, major interest in him. And so, but one of the questions that I wanted to ask is coming from a style offense, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to, misstate here. Hugh Freeze seems like a very like heavy RPO style offense out there at Liberty. So like, what are the challenges adjusting from that, or trying to shake the stigma of the like one read and go, kind of like how do you help Malik shake those type stigmas?
The funny thing is like, you can't change what's happened up to this point, right? And so, I think there's some truth to that being Coach Freeze's offense. I think people that have watched Liberty the last couple of years will realize it's probably the least amount of just RPO that Hugh Freeze has ever run, like compared to what he was at Ole Miss. He's certainly backed away. I mean, he was the original, him and Gus Malzahn were the original, like, no huddle, hurry up, RPO every play. And I would imagine, and Coach Freeze has spoken to this was about as slower tempo that he's kind of ever utilized as a play caller these last couple of years, which was interesting. There's a part of me that would have wished Malik had gotten the ability to play in that true fast-paced, no huddle snapping, kind of similar to the offense Matt Corral's been fortunate to play in, right? Because I think there are opportunities with a quarterback with that type of skill set to really kind of feast. I think the issue and what Coach Freeze maybe tempered himself a little bit was, just with the quality of of athletes that he had overall in the offense, snapping it 70 times a game maybe wasn't the best way for them to beat teams like
Right.
Virginia Tech and Coastal Carolina and, these teams that were more physically and just had better depth than Liberty did. So I think that changed his mindset a little bit. So let's start there. But no, certainly, especially in early down situations, RPO is a big part of it. And
Yes,
it's the same
very.
for Matt Corral. I mean, probably a bigger part of his offense. And, you have to – it's funny because the
They
NFL's running
Right,
more and more
right.
RPO stuff now. Like the Bills are running a ton of RPO. And so because it's becoming a bigger part of the league, it's not as big of a negative if they did a lot of it. It's just another maybe box you can check, like, hey, he executes this really well. What was interesting about Liberty is kind of the way they called their plays. So Coach Freeze ran their offense, kind of overall called the drives, but their third down situations and their third and medium, third and long pass situations, Coach Ken Austin, who is their OC, called a lot of those situations. And Ken Austin is where you see the full field pro style, pure progression type offense. So when you watch Malik's film, at least you can see a little bit of, okay, this isn't RPO. Here's a true drop back, 5 receiver out. So I think that's helpful in that when you pour into his film, you see a little bit of everything you want to see, which I think is different than maybe you saw with Justin Fields in previous years, and where you were searching for the true pro style and you couldn't find it anywhere. I think at least with Malik's, you see it. And so there's less of a question mark of can he do this? Now they would have loved to see it more, right? Or him be a little even more proficient in doing it. But I think at least you're seeing everything there.
I definitely agree with that. And at times of, looking over his film myself and doing, a write-up for our site, I noticed that he wasn't just a look to run or a run first, quarterback, which sometimes the, guys who do have that ultra athletic ability like that, who can create, with their feet, they tend to rely heavily on that. So it was nice to see that, not that he didn't use it. I mean, obviously he used it very well, very effectively.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
There were plenty of times when he would take off running, he's still, looking downfield and trying to find that bigger chunk play, which is encouraging to see from a quarterback such as that. Now, a question that I have there is what is, to kind of shift gears a little bit, trying to pair it back to, because honestly, unless the Falcons decide to pick him at 8, I don't think Malik is going to be in our range. I'd be very surprised if he makes it out of the first round at this point. And I think as the process continues to go on, he's definitely going to cement himself as, one of the quarterbacks that gets taken. And I'm not obviously not saying that just because you're on the call. I mean, that's what we heard coming out of Mobile. I was joking with Toby. I said the hype train is definitely boarding at this junction, and it's about to pull out of the station, and at for certain aspects, rightfully so. So for the Atlanta Falcons, say they decide to pull the trigger on a quarterback in a later round, like a second or a third. What do you think, the validity of sitting a guy and letting him maturate, or that may not even be the right word, but letting him mature, on the bench, on the NFL roster, can that still be a recipe for success in today's NFL, where we see guys that get drafted and thrown to the fire right out the gate?
Yeah, I mean, I think both have some validity, and both will continue to happen. I mean, there's going to be teams in different situations that are going to have to do the latter. And you saw that last year with Jacksonville and the Jets, and even Chicago to some extent, where had to go to Justin maybe earlier than they wanted to, or and then you saw the Trey Lance situation last year, where they went the old Pat Mahomes approach, right, or the old Aaron Rodgers approach, and just made them sit and not that all those situations were exactly the same, but you get the point. So I think you'll see that. Listen, here's the deal. Ideally, every single quarterback who gets drafted would get that year to like mature, learn. Like, I mean, that would be the ideal
Right.
situation for anybody. And so everybody loves to use the term like NFL ready. You know, this guy is and this guy isn't. And as if to say like this guy has to sit or this guy will be better. Well, I mean, the reality is if you're especially drafting in the first round, you're drafting a quarterback who, if they had to play right away, could find success, right? And I think you saw that at times with Justin Fields. You saw it with Trevor. Zach had I wasn't as high on Zach Wilson last year. I think it was a little bit of a bad evaluation by some people. But you know, so he struggled, and that wasn't entirely his fault. But you get the idea. You saw it with Mac Jones, right? Like you're gonna have a guy who can have success coming out early. And I would put certainly Malik. I'd put Kenny Pickett in that category. I'd put Matt Corral in that category of guys that if they had to play week 1, week 3, week 5, could go out and have success. And for some people, it's different. For Kenny, it's, hey, he's had a little bit more experience. He gets rid of the ball quickly. You know, you'd have to – it would be similar to what Mac Jones did in New England, right? You're not putting anything on him.
No,
really.
yeah.
You're just having him kind of manage the game, get rid of the ball quickly. With Malik or Matt, you have maybe a little bit more than Justin Fields or in the games Trey starting, where you have a quarterback who, hey, he has an ability with his athleticism to, even if he misses the read or is a little bit behind or he's off schedule or makes the wrong decision, he can still create and have success that way, right? You saw that with Lamar Jackson early on in his career and RG3 and some quarterbacks who their mobility allowed them to still have success even if they weren't NFL ready, you know, to the extent that we'd like them to be at that point. So I think does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think if they could sit and wait, I think that makes sense. I think you're going to see Trey Lance reap the benefit of his situation last year when he gets onto the field and, you know, looks like he's at a different level than maybe where Trevor and Zach Wilson are yet, even though they played 16 games. But I think those guys I mentioned, I think, you know, can play. And it's interesting because if you're Detroit, and we don't know how high QB's going to go. Detroit picks at 2. They need a QB, right? So whether they pick him at 2 or not, they need one. You know, you look at Carolina, they need a QB. You look at Atlanta, you know, obviously Atlanta's an ideal situation because there's set up to have that quarterback sit. I think that's super attractive for anybody coming out. So, you know, depending on in that top 10, top 15, Washington, right, you probably have a mixed bag, right? I think if you're Detroit, you're probably looking to start that guy soon. You know, I know you got Goff, and you could, you know, maybe any of those situations, you could try to sit him for a year. But I think when you take a guy super early, it's hard not to put that product on the field.
Not only is it,
you know,
not yet, right?
You're
investigating. Good Lord, listen to me. You're investing, you know, draft capital and you know, financial capital with the way, you know, things are set up, you know, nowadays.
And then it's just a league where it's like fan support. Like you want to get people energized around, you know, and so sometimes you play the quarterback earlier than you want.
Trying to get everybody pumped.
You know, people are going to come out to see him. Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors.
And you just hit the nail on the head, Sean, right there. The fans. That's what they want to see. And that's why they were hollering for Justin Fields to come out and start for Chicago over Andy Dalton like he did. Now, I think a lot of fans, if you can just kind of explain to them, because I think a lot of fans think that mobile QBs is the saviors of the offense, that they don't have to have necessarily an offensive line. But if you can explain to them, how important is that still to have an offensive line, even though they have the leg mobility to be able to extend and make plays?
Well, I mean, you saw it in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, you saw like Joe Burrow, as talented as he is, at some point, and it's really amazing that they got as far as they did with what he had to overcome, right? So, listen, I mean, there's obviously, you know, it's a team game for a reason. All the pieces have to fall into place the right way to be a team that gets you all the way there. And you saw that with the Rams, right? Like, they had the amazing defense. They had the weapons. Maybe they didn't have the right quarterback yet. And then they found that guy, made the trade, and that was the piece that got them over the top, right? You know, it's easy to say for the Bengals, you know, that linebacker crew played really well all through the playoffs. You know, some pieces stepped up defensively that maybe you didn't think were great. And Joe Burrow certainly played above
Yes.
his
Yes.
level, but he didn't have maybe one more offensive lineman would have gotten you over the top. And, so I think you need to have complementary pieces, but just like anything else, I think of it like as your five senses, right? And so, like, the old adage would be like, well, maybe I'm blind, but my sense of hearing is
Yeah.
so much better. It helps me
Yeah.
overcome, right? Well, that's the way I look at it. So if my offensive line isn't great, then the mobility of the quarterback can offset that
Okay.
to some extent. So if that goes
Yeah.
to your question, right? The problem, and I think Burrow is super talented, but certainly mobility is not a
Right.
fastest game. And so the argument could have been made for a team like Cincinnati, a little bit more of a mobile quarterback would have helped offset the struggle of their offensive line a little bit more. Now, it would have to be a quarterback who was mobile and could also do all the things Joe Burrow does really well. I'm not saying like, if Lamar Jackson was the quarterback of Cincinnati, they'd have won the Super Bowl, because I think, Joe has other things he does that offset, Lamar's mobility.
Yes,
Does that make sense? So it's not an apples to apples, but, especially like, if we look in terms of like guys in this draft class, I think you're going to find that. I think different teams are going to see how different components of what a quarterback can do can help complement our team in the way we need it, right? And so, and this won't change. Like, different teams are going to have different mentalities or different like plans of how they see their offense, what they see it looking like, right? And they're going to find and take the quarterback that fits into that the best. And that's why when you talk about the draft, you're going to have 32 different teams. And, I wouldn't be surprised if 14 have this QB as their number one QB on the board and 14 have a different QB as there. It doesn't mean that only 14 guys are right and the other guys are wrong. It's just, maybe Kenny Pickett fits more than what Malik does. And then the other team says, no, Malik, does that make sense? So,
it does.
So I think that's what you're going to see play out. And I actually think, because there's not consensus. For example, last year, because Trevor Lawrence
all the boxes,
right?
Yeah.
All 32 teams would have had Trevor Lawrence QB1, right? And so that was a consensus. And, he's so clearly this is better. This year's different in that there maybe is a little bit more of a, this guy gives me more of this, but maybe a little bit less of this. And so how does that play into what we're trying to do? So, to answer your question, it's not like it's the be all end all, like you have to be this to be successful at the quarterback position. Like I said, this year is the example of that with the two guys that were in at the end. The question is this an outlier year, or, can this still happen, right? Because if you look at the last 5-6 years, really with the exception of one guy and Tom Brady, it was the Pat Mahomes of the world and the Josh Allens of the world and these ultra, like you look at the way Deshaun Watson and playing a high level, and Russell Wilson. It was this blend, Lamar Jackson winning MVP, and even Aaron Rodgers. Like, it was this mobility. They were trait quarterbacks, right? High mobility, really athletic, super strong arms. Those were the guys that seemed to be where the game was going. So we'll see what happens going forward.
I think your guy checks quite a few of those boxes as far as like mobility, strong arm, being able to make the throws off target. Before we got on here, I was rewatching some of the Senior Bowl practices, and he probably would have taken a sack had it been like live hits or whatever, but he goes down, one hand comes back up and makes a almost like vertical throw, and I was like, that's right there is what what a team is going to see and be like, that's the kind of stuff that I got to have,
Well, when you start finding things on film that literally like only two people in the league can do, then those things kind of stand out, right?
Yeah.
And that's why every no-look pass that you see or every sidearm Pat Mahomes throw goes like viral on Twitter and social media and stuff. It's not because, I mean, we are all kind of prisoners of the moment, but it's because you don't see that every day. And you don't think that the majority of the quarterbacks in the league can make those kind of plays. And I do think you see those with Malik. You know what I mean? You can criticize other parts of his game, but I think there's no denying that he's able to do things that very few in the league, and I would say almost nobody in the draft class is able to do.
So a few more questions. I don't want to keep you all night. I know you said you just got in off the field yourself, so I don't.
You're good. Yeah.
Like on those like off platform stuff. Like, do y'all like drill for things like that? Like, is that something that almost like practicing trick shots, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way.
Did I lose you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to think about it is you're trying to create situations that mirror what happens on the field, right? And so the way we look at it is like we're trying to create a problem within our training that the quarterback has to solve. And we really want to look at it that way because it's less about me telling him exactly how to solve it, right? It's just creating the situation where they have to, using their own blend of talent, what they know, their skill set, to solve what we put in front of them. So to answer your question, we might create a drill where they drop back and they're working through a progression, and then we force them to escape. And maybe we force them where they can't attack downhill. We force them out to their left. They have to stay flat. That's the constraint that we put on them. That's the problem we created. And now they need to still execute the throw. So for some QBs, they'll just kind of close their shoulders, stay on the run, and throw. Other QBs will kind of work that like hip flip, the one that became popular through all the pro days last year, right? Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Kellen Mond, all of them doing some kind of version of roll out to the left, flip your hips, and be able to throw like on the move.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't care how he solves that, but we want to continue to create different situations. So throughout a really good comprehensive training session, we'll kind of work our way up from some foundational stuff and hopefully end with some version of what's the most complex situations we can create and let these guys work through it. And of course, when that session is Malik Willis, Justin Fields, and Trey Lance, well, it gets pretty fun with not only what we're asking them to try to do, but the way they're able to do things to pull it off is pretty interesting. So, I mean, you listen, if Quincy and I are doing the best job we can, then there's going to be very few situations or throws that may come up in a game on Sunday that they haven't at least tried a handful of times in a session with us in the offseason.
Nice. Okay, so follow-up question to that. Something I hear a lot of, and I want to like somewhat put you on the spot. What is more important? Let me see here. How do I want to phrase this? Like, what is more important, like footwork or like launch point? I don't know if that's even comparable. What I'm trying to figure out is like, what are you drilling more of? Like, what are you spending the most time in a session? Like, when everybody says, "Oh, it's the basics." Okay, what are like the basics? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it the 7-step drops, the whatever? Like, making sure you land on that back foot right. Like, what are the components there?
I think one of the most important things that we harp on is what we call like base and balance, right? And that's about, really your footwork, but not in the terms of like drops and how you move, but more of like right before you throw, right? Having both feet in the ground, being in a solid position. It's really about stability, right? And so I can't create power if I'm not stable. Is the best way to think about that. So even if I'm making a off platform or an on the run throw, we still focus on getting stability into that throw, right? So even if I'm running, the way I land or push off, if I'm a right-handed QB, push off my right foot. If I'm loaded, my foot's underneath my hip, full cleat in the ground, I'm stable as I start that throw. So that idea of stability is really the core principle that's going to allow quarterbacks to throw consistently accurate and generate consistent power, if that makes sense. Everything else kind of works around that core principle, if you will. Now, I'm skipping the whole importance of the throwing motion and like being able to like above the waist, your throwing arm specifically being consistent and efficient, right? The reason I kind of skipped that to answer your question is, to some extent, when we're talking about college NFL QBs, that's established, right? These are guys that have consistent, repeatable throwing motions that allow them to be consistently accurate. And that's always going to be number one, right? If you can throw, you can
we can work on the rest of
you can't throw.
Like you ain't making me a QB, no matter
throw. Then no amount of stability. We would have to attack your upper body mechanics first.
Bro, you'd have to attack my midsection first before we're attacking anything. No, I definitely.
That's right. It might be a long process.
I definitely don't think.
Yeah, that's definitely the way. That's the way we think about it. And the easiest way to think about it, just like commonsensically, is, like your feet. You could be sitting on the ground. You could still throw an accurate pass 15 yards.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So it starts with the upper body. You have to.
Yeah.
If you had no arms, you couldn't throw.
That makes sense,
right?
That stands to reason.
Like the simplest way to think about it. And so that's the most important piece, is actually being able to throw and but assuming that we've established that component, then the idea of being stable and generating consistent power is really the main focus. And so everything else leads to that. So if we're talking about a 7-step drop from under center, then it's about how, especially on the last 2 steps of that drop, can we catch our weight, stop going backwards, and be in a really good, stable vertical position right before we throw.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So what we're teaching on the drop is just to get to that really stable position. Or if we're teaching throwing on the run or flag escape or hip flips and all those crazy types of throws we were talking about, say, how can we get to that consistent position right before you start your motion to throw the football? Can we get to that stability and consistent position? One of the things we harp on all the time is like, let's try to throw the same way every time. So if we can get to a consistent position, whether it's an on or off platform throw, then we allow our throws to be more or less the same throwing motion every time, which is what allows us to be consistent, right? Because we do every time, we can expect the same results every time. Is kind of the way that all plays out.
Go ahead, Toby.
Makes sense?
No, I do want to ask you this. Now, I probably shouldn't ask you this. I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but I figure I'll try it anyway. I know that
worst case,
right?
Yeah, exactly. I know Malik Willis. He's a hometown guy, right? Have you guys ever talked about what that feeling would be if he was actually able to be able to play here at home in front of the Atlanta Falcons fans, knowing that he's from here? We've had a few guys we've drafted, AJ Terrell, who's from here as well, who's playing for his home team. Have you guys ever had that conversation of, because I know you mentioned it at the Senior Bowl, that it would be an ideal place if he's able to come to the Atlanta Falcons, and we were able to draft him at some point in his draft, which he probably won't be there. But I wanted to ask you that, have you guys had those conversations about what his feelings would be if he's able to land here?
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret that would be like his childhood dream, right? Like he grew up a Falcons fan. He grew up going to Falcons games. AJ Terrell was his teammate. He played with AJ at Westlake. So they're friends and teammates for 3 years. And then Malik transferred to Roswell for his senior year. So that's why people maybe don't equate them as teammates, because they see the 2 different schools. But for the first 3 years, they were teammates there at Westlake. So, yeah, I mean, without a doubt. And then selflessly, like, his whole family here. And, like, it's a lot easier for him to continue to work with Quincy and I, throughout the year if we're all in Atlanta together. So there's a lot of things that would be neat about that. The reality is, you just want to take advantage of whatever opportunity you can get. Right. And so certainly he's no less excited if any other team drafts him or picks him. But yeah, sure. The idea of potentially getting to play in his hometown in front of, his state, and being an Atlanta guy and Falcons, of course, would be a really special thing for him. I think it's interesting. I hear you guys discounting the idea of Atlanta taking a QB at 8. I think it's super interesting. We were
that's our own bias there.
Atlanta was at 4 last year. When I get it. I get it completely, and I think Matt Ryan's got a lot of good football left in him. So I'm really on either side of it. But it's funny. I think you look at the question you asked earlier about what's best for a young QB. Can we get a guy and have him sit for some time, and kind of bridge to him? So it'll be interesting to see how Atlanta thinks about that. I know a lot of hometown people love Justin Fields. We thought there was a good possibility Atlanta was going to take Trey last year. And quite honestly, I think that's why San Fran had to move up 3
been
to
saying
get
that
in front of Atlanta. Now, we know Kyle Pitts. I know Kyle Pitts really well. That's a home run draft pick, no doubt about it. It's not like they got a consolation prize by not getting Trey. They got a great player there. But if their thought last year was, do we look at maybe taking a guy like Trey if he's there, then I don't know why it would be that much different at 8 this year. Once again, if you have a core you like as much as you maybe like Trey. Now, whether they do or not at this point, who knows? I just think I've seen those guys together, and I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying I could see evaluators rating those guys very similarly.
Okay.
We started looking at pros and cons, and as an overall potential draft prospect, I could see scouts, and maybe not Atlanta.
Well, no, it's interesting that you bring it up, like in our own conversations, because of how devoid Atlanta is of talent all the way around. Like us as like fans and as so-called evaluators, would like to see a blue chip prospect that comes in and starts immediately with that 8th pick, like what we were talking about, necessarily before. And I do think that Malik Willis can come in and start at 8 or, start in the first year. But just it's almost like the same argument that I had last year, at least, from our perspective, is that, that's a lot of draft capital to sit on the bench when you are as devoid of talent as we are. Now, if you were in a different situation like San Francisco, where you had Jimmy G, you still had a very complete competitive team, then it's to me it's a different draft philosophy. Yeah. Now with the team that we have currently constructed, you can't throw a BB and not be like, oh, yep, you needed something there, because it's there's just so much. I made the joke that I almost wish that 2 or 3 years from now we would be there would be talents like Malik and Trey, and we're picking high. But with that being said, I do want, before we close out, I do want to get what is your gut, what is your mind saying Malik's going to get drafted here? I'm curious to what you think.
I don't think he gets out of the top 10. So it's been super interesting. I was pretty confident that it was already going that way back in January. As you're starting to hear, obviously the way this process works is, we build relationships. We've going through Jalen Hurts' draft prep process and through Trey's and, now through Malik's and the rest of the crew. You build connections, you start to know coaches. Obviously, the agents, and the agents talk to the GMs, and so you start to kind of hear what people's opinion of your guys and then some of the other quarterbacks as well, and just knowing how QB needy and whether Atlanta you think is a QB needy
Right.
team or not, they're probably
They're in the mix.
in that category somewhere.
They're definitely in that mix.
So you look at, and whether you think Giants are truly QB needy or not, there are another team that gets thrown in. So you got all these teams here. If you look at Detroit at 2, through Carolina, the 2 Giants picks, Denver at 9, of course, Atlanta. You got Washington at 11. You got a big run here from like 2 to 12. And then you got like the Saints and the Steelers, later in the draft at 18 and 20. So there's going to be QBs that go in that range. So now it's going to be, okay, well, are we good with whoever falls to us, or is there the one guy we want and we have to go get? And that's what's going to be super interesting. So I think you saw some mock drafts come out early, and it was maybe Washington at 11 takes the first QB. Nobody in the top 10. Whether it's Kenny or Malik, and they seem to be the consensus 1-2 right now. I think Matt Corral still has a chance to play his way into that conversation a little bit more as the process plays out. But I think those are the 3 contenders, quite honestly. The reality is that I think Washington ends up being the floor pick for a guy like Malik, where if they think he can truly drop to them, and they think they can stand pat and get them there, they'd love to. But I think you're going to find other teams if they kind of, grade Malik out through this process the way I think they're going to say, hey, that's the guy we want. And at that point, if that's the guy you want, you don't risk.
Right. So, you're feeling like you got to jump Washington.
Yeah. And so that's what I think ends up happening. I don't know if it's Carolina takes him at 6, or Detroit takes him at 2, or some other team
comes up
thinks that Carolina is going to take him at 6, or Detroit is going to take him at 2, and they have to get up in front. It'll be super interesting to see how it all plays out. I'd be very surprised. First of all, I think he'll be the first QB drafted, and there's some bias.
Well, obviously,
but I think he'll be the first QB drafted, and if that's the case. And even if he's not, quite honestly, he's the second, I still think he ends up in the top 10.
I mean, I think that's a good spot. Toby, you got anything else you want to ask?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say to his sentiments about the top 10. Carolina, there's been quite a few mocks of him going there with that number 6 pick, the Carolina Panthers. They are really needing a quarterback. They're in a situation right now where Matt Rule is going to have to. His career is on the line at this point, so he's got to be careful where his decision lies at. But when you go out and you bring somebody like Ben McAdoo in, you're going to need a guy that can really handle that offense that Ben McAdoo will bring into Carolina Panthers. And I can see Malik there. I mean, you started getting me pumped up. Now, people probably going to kill me for saying this, but you're really getting me pumped up about Malik Willis. I mean, not that he's just a hometown kid, but watching this guy, especially out there in the rain, when you're able to handle yourself out there on Wednesday, out there in the rain like he was, and make those deep throws that he was making when a lot of those guys were dropping the ball and they couldn't hold it under center. I know that had to make you smile some inside when he had such a good day out there in the rain like that in the elements. Where most of those guys weren't able to do that. So, I mean, I'm definitely getting pumped even more just hearing about what Malik Willis could possibly bring to a team, what he could do. I mean, him being able to sit behind Matt Ryan, I think that would be a dream come true, sitting behind a veteran like Matt Ryan.
You talk about making
and really soaking up knowledge.
I was going to say, you talk about making you smile. If I ain't mistaken, on the 3rd day, he was the only one to hit the trash can at the end of the practices. So, I mean, like
I said, I don't think anybody's getting drafted top 10 because they hit the trash can at the end of Senior Bowl practice. But it's like I said, hey, whatever the competition is, let's try to win it, right? That always looks good. Look, so, no, listen, I think the funniest part is, without a doubt, with the exception of maybe Bailey Zappi and Carson Strong, I don't think they're really in the conversation of what we think of top QBs. But Malik is clearly the quarterback that people generally know the least about, right? They didn't see much of him playing. And so what's neat about this process is people are starting to understand what his skill set's like. So when people are like, wow, this kid's got an arm that's different than everybody else that's here at the Senior Bowl, hey, this kid, I thought all he could do is run, but on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when all they're doing is throwing, and the entire buzz is he's the best quarterback throwing the whole week. You know what I mean? So, like, those are the pieces, those are rewarding pieces for us. I'm the least surprised. I already knew this, but for everyone else,
you walking around like I've been trying to tell you.
It's always nice. Exactly. Like, go look at my Twitter 4 years ago, right? But yeah, exactly. So it's been neat. It's been neat just to, like I said, it's because Malik put all the work in to get himself to this point that you always love seeing that work get appreciated and rewarded. And so, like I said, so all that focus on the Senior Bowl, and now it just shifts to the Combine in 2 weeks, and it's just another opportunity for him to show people, and not just on the field, which is what we've been talking about, but in the interview process and everything else, and all those things that some would say carry even, especially with the quarterback, even more weight.
A lot of weight.
So that's the next step, and we just keep moving
Awesome.
forward.
Well, Sean, man, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down and talk to us, not just about your guy, but just about, the quarterback process and just the draft process. It's been ultra enlightening and super amazing to talk to you about. I'm sure there's some other than your Twitter. There's obviously things that you would like to plug, and I would very much like to give you the opportunity to do so.
I appreciate it. I wish I had some things to plug for real, but just it's QB Coach McEvoy on social media, Twitter, Instagram, everything at YouTube and TikTok and all those fun things. So yeah, you'll find it all. Quincy Avery is my partner with Quarterback Takeover. For young guys, for QBs, just people more interested in some of that mechanic stuff we were talking about and stability and all. Like, we put a bunch of that stuff out on Instagram and Twitter and drill videos, and we'll put out stuff of Malik. If you want to see more about Malik Willis, follow our Instagram, because we're putting out content from kind of behind the scenes at draft prep and all that kind of cool stuff. So anything that gives you a chance to get a little bit more insight, into a player, maybe you want to follow a little bit more closely going forward. So.
Well, man, we very much appreciate it, and we won't keep you anymore, but y'all heard it here first, folks. Malik Willis is going in the top 10. So that's we're going to put a stamp on that. Well, man, thank you again, and you have a great night.